Well, a bit earlier this week, it was confirmed that the Chancellor Sajid Javid would be unveiling his spending plans up to 2021 next Wednesday. That's earlier than previously thought. Extra money for schools, the NHS and policing, we're told. The Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has called that move a one-off pre-election panic-driven stunt budget. That was in a tweet and is expected to echo those words once again when he unveils his own shadow spending review. Well, Miatta Fahnbulleh is the chief executive of the New Economics Foundation, the left-of-centre think tank. She also previously worked with the former Labour leader, Ed Miliband. Good morning to you, Miatta.
Good morning.
What can we expect? Plenty of criticism of the opposition, but what actual policies could John McDonnell unveil today?
Well, I think two things. The context in which we're operating is one in which we've seen one of the kind of biggest squeezed on living standards for a decade, where we've got a climate emergency, where we have communities up and down the country under huge pressure. And to be fair to the Labour Party, they have grasped this far sooner than I think the government has, insofar as they've been talking about the fact that the economy is broken, the economy doesn't work for the majority of people. And if you look back at their 2017 manifesto, actually they set out a programme of reform. Now, in my view, there are lots of areas that they had to go further.
Is that still relevant, though? As we're 2 years down the line in a very different economy in a very different world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we'll see is a doubling down. So their spending programme, so they talked about 25 billion of capital spending over 10 years. They talked about 50 billion of day-to-day spending. I suspect they'll double down on that. I suspect they'll move further. But what we've seen over the last 2 years coming out of Labour is a conversation or ideas around reforming the economy. So moving into the space of thinking about ownership. I think back to the Chancellor's announcement back at party conference last year on employee ownership. They're moving into the kind of environmental space, talking about a green industrial revolution. Now, we need to see more flesh on the bones of this.
Sure.
But for me, it's a positive space that in our politics, we're now talking about long-term reform of the economy, which is absolutely what we need to do.
Which is something that you focused on as well in your recent studies, for example, the fact that we do need to do something about a productivity problem. And one of the things you've touted, which, because this will cost several £billion, of course, over 30 billion you've perhaps estimated. And one of the ideas you've touted is abolishing the personal allowance, which is an idea that the Labour Shadow Chancellor has come out behind and supported, but that would raise taxes on the majority of families, wouldn't it?
Well, no, we think it's very progressive.
But it would mean higher taxes for a lot of families.
Well, no, the burden of it falls on top tax earners. And in the end...
35% of families, you say, which is quite a lot.
But they're earning the most. And so actually our view is if you look at the squeeze at the bottom end, if you look at the fact that actually at the moment, whether you're in work or not, there's this kind of cliff edge for people. The idea we've got the personal allowance, it's hugely regressive. So actually top earners earn to get far more from the personal allowance than those at the bottom end. And actually by shifting that and turning it into a weekly national allowance, something that allows everyone basically a stake, irrespective of whether you're in work or not. It doesn't cost us anymore, but it's a way in which we can protect those at the bottom end whilst ensuring that actually those at the top end do no worse off.
Just very briefly, Miatta, because this is a real conundrum, isn't it? Because even Sajid Javid saying there's no blank cheque, despite what his boss might want, because we've got the uncertainty of Brexit hanging over us and the need to keep money in reserve. That's a sensible policy, isn't it? So really now's not the time to be flashing the cash as perhaps the Shadow Chancellor would like.
Well, so I think there are two things. I think we've got to think about how we use fiscal policy in a way to drive long-term structural change. And we are in a moment of crisis. So it's not just the kind of the deep economic crisis that we're seeing in communities on the ground. But, we have to fundamentally change our economy if we want to respond to climate change. That requires big reform, but also investment over the long term. So at a point where interest rates are at record low, this is exactly the time to be borrowing to invest in the long term. And it's madness if we don't.
But now, also, no deal could cost us 30 billion.
Exactly. So no deal Brexit is a problem in all of this, which is why I think it's complete folly, actually complete madness that the government is even countenancing this, because the impact, not just in terms of the short-term hit on the economy, but, that might tip us into recession, but the fact that it's going to cost us about 30 billion a year seems a completely insane thing to be doing when we not only have the day-to-day pressures, but we also have long-term structural change.
The clock is against us, and of course other economists would disagree. That's what economists do, of course, but good to talk to you, Miatta Fahnbulleh. Thank you.